Our scripture for this evening will come from Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15, starting with verse number 25. In our previous discussion, we looked at Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 17. There we talked about the familiar story of the prodigal son. On tonight, we want to look at the prodigal son's brother. So much emphasis tends to be placed on the prodigal son that we may miss some lessons and perhaps some things that can help us in examining ourselves by looking at attributes of his brother. So again, we'll look at Luke chapter 15, but tonight starting at verse 25. While you're turning there, think about some things in regards to human nature. Think about, for example, how much people have a tendency to want to be like someone else. They want to emulate others. For example, they have been showing in the news recently about Serena Williams when she was young, and they asked her what kind of tennis player she wanted to be like. And she responded and said she wanted people to be like her. Back in the day, Gatorade had a commercial talking about Michael Jordan, the basketball player, and they say, be like Mike. Cosmetologists constantly tell us that people come in and they're wanting to have images of beauty like a Beyonce or one of the Kardashians or some other noticeable person. Sometimes when we look at other people, what they have going for them, we might miss some things that we have going for ourselves. When you obsess about who someone else is, what they have, what they experience, or what they enjoy, you may miss counting the blessings that you already have. And that's why we look at the prodigal son's brother, because he was just that person. So busy looking at what his younger brother had and the privileges given to him that he did not realize how much jealousy he was displaying toward his brother and how much he was ignoring his own blessings. We have to admit that in our lives we admit all kinds of sins, but there's some sins we never admit. For example, we can admit what I call empathetic sins. That is, when we share with others that sin, they can be empathetic because they understand. So, for example, a person can say, I'm angry. Well, who doesn't understand getting angry? A person can even admit something like, say, fornication. So, well, you're human. We all have physical needs. Person can admit addiction. People say, well, we get caught up in the traps of life. Those things elicit empathy. But then there's those sins that are perhaps what I would call the pathetic sins. And that is the stuff that we don't ever want to admit. Like no one ever gets up in church and says, pray for me because I'm a liar. Or pray for me because I'm an adulterer. Or pray for me because I am jealous of someone. Now to God, sin is sin. All sins are the same. But in our minds, we subconsciously choose what sins we'll admit to and what sins we don't. And again, the sin of jealousy is that unspoken sin. Notice this in the life of the brother, the person who's not always given a lot of the spotlight in our study of Luke chapter 15, starting at verse 25. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and drew nigh to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said unto him, your brother is come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him safe and sound. And he was angry and would not go in. Therefore came his father out and entreated him. And he answering said to his father, lo, these many years do I serve thee, neither transgressed I at any time your commandment, And yet thou never gave me a kid that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this thy son was come, which has devoured your living with harlots, you have killed for him the fatted calf. And he said unto him, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. It was meet that we should make merry and be glad, for this thy brother was dead and is alive, and was lost and is found. Now, of course, we understand the overarching theme of this particular passage of Scripture, Luke 15, is to emphasize salvation and God's hope for restoration and redemption of lost souls. But this passage has meanings beyond that of salvation because it gives us an intimate look at human personalities and tendencies. This is a portrait not only of a son, but this can be a portrait of us if we're not careful. As you analyze Luke chapter 15, let's walk through the verses and see some of the struggles of this young man, and then examine whether or not we face some of those struggles. For example, in verse 25 and verse 26, we see he's surprised and disappointed in that someone else, i.e., his brother, is being celebrated. You ever found yourself not understanding why someone else is deserving of honor? Someone else is not enjoying something that you don't think they should enjoy? In verse 28, we see he's angry. In verse 28, we see he's withdrawn. In verse 29, we see that he has a superiority attitude and he feels entitled. He thinks he's better than his brother. He's looking at all of his brother's sins, so he feels superior. In verse number 30, we see that he's judgmental, he's condemning, he's critical. Here are two problems with this type of reality. Number one, he failed to see his own favor. When you're busy looking at what someone else has, how God has blessed them, how things are working in their life, you can easily miss the favor that you have. The blessings you have will be minimized in your mind when you are analyzing someone else's blessings. Don't worry about why God has been good to them, or why God saw fit to give them what he gave them, or why God allowed them this, that, or the other. Because you can be so busy looking at them, you miss what you have. The second problem in this passage is that when you're busy criticizing and analyzing other people, you miss looking at your own faults. How easy it is for us to think about what's wrong with someone else. But do we look at what's wrong with ourselves? Or do we focus on what's wrong with others so that we don't have to look at ourselves? Let me ask you to think about three questions. Can you appreciate the forgiveness granted to someone else? Whatever you know about someone's sin past, can you appreciate that God forgave them? Second, can you appreciate the favor granted to someone else? If you look at someone's life and you see something, you're able to understand that God blessed them. Can you appreciate that and be okay with the fact that God blessed them? If you can't appreciate that God forgave someone or that God has given favor to someone, is that really a reflection on them, or is that a reflection on yourself? And can you appreciate the following that others have? The idea that other people have influence or are celebrated or have friends or social circle or people that love and care for them. Can you appreciate that? Or do you get upset like the brother and say, why him? Beloved, we need to take inventory of how much grace and mercy we have received. No matter what you see God having done for someone else, I promise God has been good to you. And always remember that celebrating others does not take away from you. When you see someone having their moment, let them have their moment. Everything and every moment doesn't have to be about me, myself, and I. And always remember that how you treat others when they are down will determine how you are treated when you are down. Because the Bible does say you reap what you sow. And when they are up, how you treat them when they are up will determine if you may even get allowed to come up. Because if you can't appreciate what God is doing for someone else, He may not bless you because you're not emotionally, but most of all spiritually prepared for His blessings. Always keep this in mind. You have it right now as good as you're supposed to have it. And if you want to have it better than right now, you can't be bitter when God has blessed someone else. This has been another installment of A Few Minutes with the Minister.